Hi, and welcome to CommieCast, the podcast series from the Communist Party of Britain, in which we discuss issues that matter to you. Today, we're going to discuss the education system and how it can be made to work for everybody, not just the 7% of people that go to private schools, but make up 65% of senior judges, 30% of MPs, 60% of permanent secretaries in the civil service, and a surprise to me, I gotta say, 26% of new tech CEOs. Even in supposedly new meritocratic industries, they have come to dominate. I'm Stuart McGill, convener of the Political Economy Commission in the Communist Party, and joined first here by Emma Jane Phillips. Now, Emma, right, is from the Northeast, as you'll probably tell whenever she starts to talk. She's worked in industry for a while for, I believe it was GEC Marconi, so she knows something about how the capitalist system works and some of the more cutting edge parts of the capitalist system. But she now works in higher education. I think you worked in further education for a few years and now in higher education for how long, Emma?
About 20.
About 20 years. Okay, so you talk from a position of some knowledge about this. Okay, Emma, first question is going to go to you. Steve will come to you later on and introduce you so people don't forget you by the time you come to talk. Emma, what do you think are the main problems in the education system now, and why have these problems arisen?
The main problem is the whole system is not fit for purpose. That's not to say that the teachers are bad or the educators are bad. It's that the underpinning focus is all on academia. It's all about exam results. It's based on a system where you have to attain certain standards at a certain time. There's no freedom in there. There's no ability to develop a child or develop a person to their own thinking. If you think about where it was 25, 30 years ago, we had our polytechnics, which were establishments that focused on generating our generation of workers. They focused on skill-based development. And then you had the red bricks or the traditional universities, which were all about academia. So you had two strands that enabled one side to actually do the implementation and the underpinning of society that we need for the working, and then you had the other side that was there for development and developing the next level on the plane or just pursuing academic thought. And then we merged systems so that the underlying need for work-based development was gone. The working ethic was gone. The value of the workers was replaced with the value of books and writing and the pressure to have publications in elements that really no one's going to read. And that, although at the higher level, cascaded all the way down. So everything is about hitting targets. Everything is about jumping through hoops. You're standardizing our children. We're standardizing our teenagers, saying you must fit this box at this time. There's no freedom for development. There's no joy of learning and developing a skill set for the sheer sake of it. And one size doesn't fit all. We've got so many falling through the cracks, so many of our future generation of our children that are just not going to be successful, not because they can't, but because the system won't allow them to succeed. The resources are too limited. 1 in 5 teachers have to pay for their own resources and provide their own elements to use in school because schools don't have the money. 1 in 8 primary schools don't have libraries. How can you develop and not allow children to express themselves and read? And you'd probably get away with it when the schools used to be next to libraries, but now the government has slowly eradicated public libraries. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to develop yourself. And the ability to develop practical skills has gone. There's no woodwork, there's no metalwork, there's no HE. Everything has been focused on you must jump through this academic hoop. Well, not everyone is academic. And I don't want necessarily a plumber with a PhD. I want somebody who's learned with an apprenticeship, come up to the roofs and can fix me leaking pipes, not write me a 3,000-word essay on why it's leaking. We've got that issue where the resources aren't being put into place. And when they are put into place, they're only in place for a very select few that are going to meet the niche market that the government or the society, the capitalist society, actually say that they want, which embeds inequality in the system. You know, we're losing the ability to develop a good working rounded society by undervaluing the working class.
Thank you very much, Emma. A good searing indictment in a relatively short space of time there. That was very interesting and quite deeply depressing in many ways. Now we turn to Steve Hanford. Steve is from Birmingham, university educated at Southampton, spent some time in the army, in NATO Norway and operations in the north of Ireland for a couple of years. He's taught in Sunderland Secondary Mainstream for 5 years. He's taught in a secure training centre at Durham. And now you re-entered mainstream education in 2014, yeah? After some redundancy, something which happened to me a while ago. And I know many people actually work for the banking sector. Quite a few people actually went into teaching after that from the banking sector. So, hell, no wonder education is having problems right now. So, you have a special educational needs teacher in the northeast of England. Steve, thank you very much for coming on the cast. Do you want to go ahead and answer the same question and maybe add to and elaborate on what Emma has just said?
Yeah, Emma's right. And, you know, I'm part of that generation. I'm the last of the boomers. I remember the post-war consensus. And there were problems with that. You know, my sisters went to grammar school and secondary modern school, one to one, one to the other. So the 11 plus was really a pale imitation of the public school system. And the whole thing was there and still is there to reproduce class inequalities. But there was a purpose to it, because that consensus after the war was about the channeling of people into jobs, and those jobs would last for life, and then they would get a gold watch and a final salary pension. And that went for teachers as well. Now, I know there were problems, but the one thing that underlies the demise of our educational system really is neoliberalism. It's that ideology that has set false competition, false notions of competition into the system, and has stripped out a lot of the value from what we do. So if we were going to start anywhere, we need to start on the ideological level and say, our schools are not rackets. They've been racketized over the last 40 years, and over the last 20 years, a lot. Everything from PFI contracts, which have, not everything's broken. You know, there are some fantastic buildings, there's some beautiful schools and facilities, but the way in which they were obtained, procured, was through a racket. People got rich from this, and way too rich. It could have been done a lot cheaper through public procurement. And the racketization of exams, exam boards, qualifications, even the breaking up of coherence in the system, and the dissolution of the LEAs, pitting school against school, child against child, parent against parent, postcode against postcode. These notions of competition have been deeply divisive. So I would start with neoliberalism and its ideas of choice and competition, which only really pertain to the rich. They don't help the working class at all. But that's been a very, very corrosive influence within our society and our education system over the last, you know, I won't even get started on student loans, but that's really where I would aim my main sort of fire at the education system and its demise over the last 20 and 40 years.
Okay, thank you, mate, for that. Would you say, is it probably fair to say that education has become something which is there to make a certain number of people who may well turn out to be friends of the Conservative Party or funders of the Conservative Party, is it there to help them make some money?
Well, you only have to look at PFI contracts to see that. And it's the same old faces, the state monopoly capitalists, you know, everything from the data processors who are monopolies, right the way through to, and I'll give you a case study very, very quickly, was Letters and Sounds. Now, Letters and Sounds is a phonics program. It works. It's becoming doctrinaire and it needs to be resisted. as a doctrine, so it mustn't be allowed to ossify, but it works. Now, that was developed through public funding and through public academia, and it was a brilliant program, but it was banned. They banned it. Now, why have they banned it? They've banned it because it was free. Now it has to be parceled out and given to individual providers, and it has to be commodified and racketized, and you have to buy it. So schools now have to buy it for thousands of pounds. And that's just one example. Things that are publicly funded for the public weal and free are detested by this government. And they're instantly seized and commodified and reprocessed and fed back to you as something you have to buy and spend tax dollars on. So those people who are now have appropriated all that knowledge are going to get rich. And that is, I think, is deeply obscene. And that's just one case study. There are many, many more.
Okay, thank you, mate. Emma, back to you. Basically, what can we do to resolve these fundamental issues? What are the main things that you would like to do to go ahead and make the education system more fit for purpose, and fit for the purpose that we think it should be, which is to go ahead and help people across the range of abilities and, I guess, a social class to realize their full potential? What can we do?
The whole thing needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, because what we've got now doesn't work, and it's never going to work because it's fundamentally capitalist. It's there purely to just service those who already have. It doesn't support any of the ones that haven't. We already assume that students are going to have computers and mobiles and this, that, and the other, and they don't. Well, you do if you're from a certain background, but looking at the pandemic, there were students there who could not learn because A, they didn't have broadband, or they were sharing one phone between an entire household. They were assuming that the parents were able to support the teaching. Well, many of the parents in certain backgrounds, they've got their own difficulties. They maybe can't read, they maybe got to work, they can't do that. We need to strip it down and empower teachers to educate, and not educate to a set of standards which say you must jump through this hoop by that age, but actually say, what is this child good at? Let's not devalue the work. Let's not devalue the physical crafts. Let's teach the children. Let's empower the children and the teachers to focus on what they are good at and allow them to grow, because at the moment we are failing. Students can educate themselves with the help of a good school and a supportive mentorship behind them to escape poverty, to move up the class structure and to perform to their maximum ability, but not if we don't support them. All we do with the current system is perpetuate the oppression and the keeping down of the working classes, keeping the peasants in their place. Heaven forbid that they excel to get to the top and actually strip back to what we need. So I would remove league table pressures, enable or empower tutors and students and staff to be the very best that they can be, and fund it, publicly fund it, and get rid of the private system. Take the best bits out of it and give that skill set to everyone. There's no reason, just because you've got parents or family money or something, to allow one child to excel while a similar child with the same ability crashes and burns. That is not fair. That is not fair. It is not just, and it should never be allowed to happen.
Okay, Steve, please elaborate on that and let us know what you would do.
Yeah, what's to be done? Well, you could look no further really than Finland to see what needs to be done. The first thing is you need to have socialism. Now, Finland isn't a socialist country, it's a social democratic country. But in order for this to work with the strength and the pedigree of our own ruling class, you need a revolution and you need socialism. Because you cannot start trying to patch and mend a system which is designed to keep the ruling class, and the working class disadvantaged, perpetually in poverty and demoralisation, or languishing as a reserve force of workers and unemployed, or reliant upon state handouts just to make it from one Sunday to the next. You've got to have socialism. A lot of the underlying problems in our system, SEN, obesity crises, illiteracy crises, this crisis, that crisis, retention, they come from social injustice. So unless you cure that at the root, you cannot then start to build a proper education system. Now, Finland 50 years ago found that their education system was failing. So one of the fundamental things they did, to echo what Emma was saying, they abolished the private sector and they made it free. And they gave people routes to go down. So you can go down an academic route or you can go down a vocational route. You don't start testing children. The first test that they get is around about 16. They don't start formal school until they're 7. Play and joy and expression is built into the curriculum. Notions of personal competition, winners and losers, is stripped out. And it's telling, isn't it, that Finland is close to the Soviet Union, because these are not new ideas. These are ideas that came after 1918, and they have been brought back because they work. So you need socialism. You need to strip out ideas of capitalism, of winners and losers and competition and injustice, and then you can start to build a democratically accountable education system that advantages every child and stops a lot of the problems that we're trying to deal with drugs or with SEN or with techniques and other things that we're trying and sometimes failing to deal with. You can solve those things at source. Now, they're not going to go away, but you can lessen them massively by doing that. So that's what I would say on that, Stuart.
That's really interesting, because I've often thought that in this country in general, we don't look enough at other countries' education systems and see what works for them. We're actually quite insular, and we're largely ignorant of what happens elsewhere, what they get right, and also what they get wrong, because there are systems like, say, Korea, where they clearly have some issues in the way they handle people who don't necessarily conform to their idea of success. Emma, do you want to say anything about that? Other countries and maybe other models of education in this country upon which we could build?
There's the kind of what it's called, it's going to go ahead. There is the freedom to allow a child to actually express and learn and develop at their own pace. There's a school in Newcastle which actually there is no formal curriculum. It's a free school. The child they pick what they want to learn. They go down their own avenues, and it's not constrained with what is traditionally said. Must be maths, English, science. That's gone. If a child wants to investigate or do an experiment or look, they've got the freedom to go and do it, and the staff are there to support and guide and direct. And that freedom to allow a child or any student to experiment and explore and go down a route without fear of being chastised. Because what we have at the moment is we take all that free will and we crush it out of the child from the second they go into primary school, even nursery. We take away their joy and their love of thinking outside the box. That's what we need to put in. So I love the free school model where they just pick their own curriculum. Now, there does need to be some guidelines in there, but we start school far too young. Far too young. We need to check, why do we do that? Because it gets the workers back to the workplace quicker. That's why we do it. It serves the child, no purpose whatsoever. But the cultures where the children go to school much later and don't do formal teaching, Japan has a similar system, where they actually allow those children to be free and explore what they want to, gives you more focused and intellectually stimulated and stimulating children and young teens. So I would say let's strip out the constraints and allow children to develop what they want at their own pace and go and investigate what they want to and get dirty and lose and be okay with that.
Let's go on to a few more nuts and bolts issues now. I understand that in the primary and secondary sector, the Communist Party, we campaign for a national education service. How will we deliver this with so many unions potentially disagreeing about that? Steve, over to you on this one first, please.
I've been thinking about this. I'm not sure why they would disagree with this. They were foursquare behind Corbyn's idea of a national education service. So I can't see what possible objection you would have to it. You have a national health service, have a national education service. You're looking at increasing maybe the spend. We already spend 6.1% of GDP on education. We spend a lot on education, but it's where you deploy that funding. That's the key thing. If you're frittering it away on PFI contracts when it should be going to frontline services for special educational needs, that's one thing. But a coherent education service that goes right the way through from nursery, right the way through to tertiary, university, lifelong learning, that's got to be a good thing, because it's that coherence. You can build terms and conditions for people. You don't have this idea of MATs and multi-academy trusts all paying people different wages and one driving down the standards of the other and driving down the terms and conditions of the other, which is what we've got now. We've got downward pressure. And you only have to look at the way the government is talking about pay for teachers. Now they want to iron out the differentials, but they want 30 grand starting salaries. So they want young people to come in flattered by a 30 grand starting salary, burn them for 3 years, get rid of them and replace them very, very quickly on a high turnover. This is a recipe for catastrophe. So the system of remuneration as well needs to be looked at. And I think a national education service is the only way that you can handle that.
Thanks, Steve. Emma, any views on this one?
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I don't think that the perception of unions going at loggerheads with each other, I don't think that's real, because the unions have got a common goal. They want what's right for their members and they want what's right for the profession that they're in. So why would they be battling? Unions already work together, certainly in the higher education sector. We do joint pay negotiations, we do joint terms and conditions within organizations. There's no reason for unions to battle against each other because they've got the same ultimate goal. And I absolutely love and firmly believe in that national education system, free at the point of use. Like Steve was saying, we've got the National Health Service, so why wouldn't there be an education system that goes? It standardizes, it levels, it gives everyone an equal shot. And all the money that is being spent on massive buildings that look pretty but are not functional, or that have been palmed off in private education contracts and all the different perks that people have got going, they can be actually put into one central resource because there's enough funding in the system to give every child a chance and to give every adult a chance and to allow that lifelong learning, so that if you're not destined to be academic from an early age, or because education's burnt you out and because you want to change careers, or just because you've gone to a school that has done everything with your life to crush out that need to learn, if you've got that lifelong system in place, you're not going to be failing for life, forever. You've got that chance to go back into education when it's ready for you, when you know what you are. We ask children at 10, 12, 14 to make decisions that are going to impact upon the rest of their life or their careers. Let's allow them to change their minds and develop in a way that suits them and what benefits society, because we're going to end up in a situation where we have a whole load of people who can write a wonderful essay but can't do anything, and you're going to end up with a workforce that isn't fit for purpose. And again, that comes back to devaluing the worker. But the workers are the ones that keep society going. So I'm a huge fan of it. I don't think the unions will battle, and I think it's the only way forward, a true socialist education system.
Great, thanks very much for that. Interesting to me, because certainly I remember whenever I was a kid, we kind of thought, certainly the boys in my school, we thought education was something which happened to other people and other people for whom we had no respect for various reasons as well. And I was able to go ahead for various teachers took an interest in me when I was about 15 or 16. And I was able to go ahead and get myself back on track. A lot of my friends didn't, and were unfortunately confined to a life of petty criminality and drifting from one job to another badly for unfortunately the rest of your life. So what you say then is very important. Now, as we're having this conversation at the time of some local authority elections coming up, we have to ask, how do you see the relationship of education to local authorities developing? Is there still going to be a role for academies, or as a model, Are that here to stay, or do we need to go ahead and make some fundamental changes? I think I can guess your responses, but Steve, tell me what you think on that one, mate.
Yeah, you probably guessed right. Academies are there to reproduce inequalities, and they need to go. There are faults and failings with the old LEA systems. These were bureaucratic and clunky often. You've got to democratize education, and you've got to make it dynamic and powerful, and you've got to put the working class. It's not just about public ownership, it's about working class control. So if you can give local areas education committees, and you can give regional areas and then national education committees reporting in to a central commission, you can start to build a democratic system that responds to individual local need, that deploys funding equitably, that isn't controlled by some Mandarin like the DFE controls everything from the centre now, that doesn't have its bully boys and its Ofsteds going around, but critically supports improvement through evidence and through peer review. You know, the thing that works for academia is peer review. So it's about trust, democratization, and it's about giving working class people the reins and the power to develop, what a country, and a socialist country with the commanding heights of the economy under the control of the working class, and all the resource that requires, and all the workers that requires, and the training that requires, through the greening of the economy, retraining workers away from meaningless jobs or dirty jobs into socially useful and green jobs, away from militarism and into the sorts of things that we need to develop our society and drive it forwards. So empowerment of people right down to the local level through an education committee system, and the expansion of democracy is key to this, Stuart, I think.
Okay, Sal, thank you. Emma.
Yeah, I agree. The issue with the education system is that it's got to be locally targeted. Every little education area has got their own needs. They've got their own needs for what they need from a workforce. They have their own additional needs in terms of what the socio-economic background of that particular area is, what the deprivation is, what the parents or the actual cohort that you're pulling from have got. And without that local understanding, you can't tailor an education system to be fit for purpose. So when you have people from down south telling northerners what they should be learning and how they should be learning and how much they should be spending, it's like, no, I don't think so. But the problem you have is that, and this is why it always frustrates me when the local elections have such low turnouts, because unless we can engage the local societies and the local populations in that local election, you're never going to make it work, because they say, oh, I'm not voting for that. But local elections are really important, because that's when you're electing local people who can make such a big difference, and we have to get that empowerment back. I think a lot of the time, they say unions can't take action unless we get a 50% turnout of all membership, but yet we're devolving power and budget spending to people who have a mandate sometimes that's only 5 or 6%. That's fundamentally wrong. We have to engage people. We have to get them to understand that the population, we have control of our own lives and those around us. But if we don't engage, and if we don't listen to the voices, and if we don't allow those voices to speak, in a true socialist democratic way, we're never going to get anywhere. We're always going to be oppressed by the rich, central government that has their own agenda, which has nothing to do with local politics and local agendas. It's just what services them and their mates.
I'm getting the impression pretty strong here that you guys think we need to change the priorities of education and the purpose of education. And we can't look at this in isolation, of course, which again resonates with me, because certainly at my school, many of the teachers treated us, we weren't even the people that were going to be taking things to the back of the van. All right. We weren't going to be the people that were driving the van. Some of us were going to be the people that were hijacking the van later. And unfortunately, that did come true in certain cases. It has to be admitted. So what can we do to go ahead and transform? I guess we're talking about a major change in society here, but you'd agree, we need to do something to transfer the priorities, to transform the priorities of education, why we educate kids and how we do it and how we prepare them. Emma.
It's going to have to be radical shake-up. This is not something that you can do with gentle tiptoeing around. It needs a radical reboot. Rip the system down, build it up again. And the only answer is true socialism. That's the only way you're going to get it. Because as long as you don't fulfill that socialist agenda, you're always going to have that tier structure. And as long as there's tier structure, the workers at the bottom are always going to be oppressed. It needs to be ripped down and rebuilt, but rebuilt by the socialist, by the workers. So building it top down, build it bottom up. That's the only way you're going to get it to work. And stop judging people. You know, I went to a rough school. You know, the expectations were you would either be pregnant at 13 or 14 or in jail by 16. Those are your two options in life, you know. And that was the expectation because it was a very poor area that I grew up with. And I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I still don't know how that happened. But the only way that you can do it is to tell the generation coming up they have value, that everything they do is valued, that they are worthy, not worthless, and that's socialism, that valuing every worker, valuing every individual, knowing that everyone, regardless of whether or not society deems them as being intellectually incompetent or special needs or disabled or whatever it is, everyone has place in society, everyone has a role in society, and everyone deserves to have their potential maximized from an education system that is built for them, by them. And the only answer is socialism. That's the only way you're going to get that through.
Thank you very much, Emma. Steve, over to you. Views on that one, please.
Yeah, I would be a bit even more granular and say that we need to, well, I totally agree, rip it down and start again. But yeah, I would say that in the early years, we need something which is play-based and is about critical thinking and exploration, and not about testing and doing phonics screening for children in nurseries. You know, it's been proven, you ask a 5-year-old a question, 3 times the same question, you'll get 3 answers, different answers. Then a foundation stage, a secondary stage, a specialist elective stage, 16 to 18, a graduate stage. Now, at each of those stages, you must build in things that our system lacks, and those are critical thinking and exploration. They are things like philosophy, political education, and economics, because those are the things that are stripped out, and they're stripped out deliberately. And George Carlin, I think, put this wonderfully, didn't he? They want the button pusher. They want somebody who's just smart enough to do the paperwork and then to roll up and then find that the magical disappearing pension has vanished on the day that they retire. And that's the vision. You know, the constant pushing of the retirement age, the constant lowering of pensions. You are supposed to now work and then die shortly after you retire so that you can't pick your pension up. That's where we're going. So we really need to think about what education is for. It's not to service the profits of capitalists. It's to build a nation of people, you know, a socially advanced nation and technologically advanced nation. You cannot do that unless you teach people to think critically.
I agree 100%. Particularly about economics. One of the jobs I do is try and disabuse people of some of the garbage which is taught and which is perpetuated in the press by people on the right wing and the so-called left wing too, about deficits in particular. This simplistic idea that the government has to balance the books, and you had people saying in the last election there's no magic money tree, when obviously there is, and there has been for some considerable time. So I agree 100% upon that. This is a really crucial thing, I think, because at this time more than any other, we need to teach people how to develop a proper questioning and critical faculty, because we are being assailed with a pile of old nonsense right now. The Russia and Ukraine dispute has been turned into some kind of simplistic good v evil confrontation, when it's obviously much more complicated than that. And it's been done for a purpose, and we all understand what the purpose is. Emma, over to you on this one. How would you go ahead and restructure education so we teach people how to think, and to think critically, and also to think things through until the end?
This is one of my big bugbears, because I obviously teach older students. There is no critical thinking. There is no independent thinking. If you don't spoon feed it to them, they go, I don't know what to do. This starts really young. This has got to start, because it's not that we need to teach critical thinking. We need to stop not teaching it, because what happens is we crush out the inquisitive nature. We crush out the ability to go and read around a subject. When people say, why? You speak to any child, why? And we fob them off with answers, or say, oh, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but again, it's not just the critical thinking that's the issue. If you look at the surrounding structures, where do they go for information? Because you've got the media telling them one line and only one line. They don't know the alternatives. I mean, the number of people who still think we only have two political options, that there's no other option but Labour or Tory. Now there's a debate whether there is much nuance in that, but we crush it out of them. And it pains me to say it, but this critical thinking is the one thing that private schooling does a darn sight better. And it might be because they get a different type of student in there, and they're not fighting fires. And a lot of the classes are significantly small. I mean, you've got A-levels with like 1 or 2 people in versus 30 or 40 in a college, But what you get from a private education is the ability to do that critical. And the reason it comes is because you're allowed the freedom to express your view, and you're not crushed. So if your view differs from somewhere else, then you're allowed the freedom to explore, and people will challenge the view. Whereas what we have at the moment is people just saying, no, it's wrong. It's wrong. And it's like, well, no, it's not wrong. It's a different view. Different views don't mean it's wrong. Now, you can educate that person, say, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? But at the moment, we banish it. We crush it from primary. So it starts right at the bottom. When somebody says why, answer them. Tell them why. Give them alternative views. Give them the resources. Say, well, actually, this is what most people say, but actually, if you look at this, there's a different view. Nurture that instead of crushing it. But you've got to start much younger, because by the time I get them, there's no saving them. They're not going to read a book. They're not going to critically. They can't. There's no logic patterns there, because everything is all about meeting the test answers. And one size, one answer is correct, the other one is wrong, and that's what they want. Where we all know reality is far more nuanced than black and white, right or wrong. So we've got to start much younger and stop crushing it.
Yeah, some very interesting points there. I used to work in the banking sector, and I worked with quite a few people from the private education system there. In fact, the vast majority in senior positions in one of the banks I worked in were privately educated people. And they're born to rule. They're also educated to rule. They have a massive self-confidence, partly which comes from what they're born to, but it's instilled in the education system they've been through. They've got a massive network of people who are also wealthy and influential, which helps too. But they're taught how to give presentations, okay? And they were all very good, much better than most of us, the comprehensives, as we used to be called, or the comps, in standing up and doing presentations. Not all of them, but the vast majority were. Right, thank you very much indeed, both of you. I'm going to end here with a little quote from Paulo Freire, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he states that the more students work at storing the deposits entrusted to them, the less they develop the critical consciousness which would result from their intervention in the world as transformers of that world. I guess both of you are looking at the nodding heads here. I guess both of you would agree with that one. God, we should maybe have just said that. That would have saved us the time for the podcast. But it's been very, very useful, very interesting. Thank you both very much indeed. Right, this is me, Stuart McGill, saying thank you to all of you for listening. We will go ahead and put some supporting documentation in the website that accompanies the podcast. Please have a look at that. And always seek understanding beyond your immediate perception. One of the great lessons I learned from martial arts. So nobody ever taught that to me at school. Thank you very much, guys. Speak to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All the best. Thanks there.
Bye.